I've got one thing to say about the Orioles getting the win over the Jays on Thursday night and winning the series. Gibby!
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, August 25th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' 5-3 victory over the Toronto Blue Jays on Thursday night. I'll get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including a great start from Kyle Gibson, a fantastic day at the plate and in the field for Cedric Mullins, and then another home run for Anthony Santander. Then we'll go through some Orioles news and notes on the pod, including Danny Coulombe returning to the bullpen and a little update on Jack Flaherty. And finally, a series preview for this weekend set between the Orioles and the Rockies. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks, and you could win up to 100 times your money. Just download the Sleeper app and use promo code Locked On, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. So we start this one with an Orioles victory. The O's 5 and the Blue Jays 3 is the final score from Oriole Park at Camden Yards on Thursday night as the O's win the series, taking 2 out of 3 from Toronto after dropping that heartbreaker in extra innings on Tuesday night. The O's come back, get the victory on Wednesday to even the series, and then win it 5-3 to take the series Thursday. And they end the season series. That was the final regular season matchup between the Orioles and the Blue Jays. It was total domination by the O's this year. They go 10-3 against Toronto this season. I know this Blue Jays team is good, and they still got a good chance to make the playoffs. But if you're an Orioles fan who's just watched the Blue Jays 13 times this year, and it's the games against the O's, I'm not impressed, and you're not impressed. This team does not look good when they play Baltimore. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 5-3 win over the Blue Jays, which allowed the O's to continue in first place and remain 2 games up on the Tampa Bay Rays, who once again took a lead late and won against the Colorado Rockies bullpen. Josh Lowe had a 2-run homer in the 8th inning to break a tie. Rays beat the Rockies 5-3 to sweep them, but the O's get the win to stay 2 games up. 5 things you need to know from the Orioles win, though. First thing you need to know is Kyle Gibson. What a start. Maybe his best with the Orioles. It was definitively his longest with the Orioles, as he became the first Orioles pitcher to throw 8 innings in a game this season. Gibson goes 8 strong innings, allowing just 3 runs on 6 hits. He struck out 8. He walked just 1. He allowed a homer, and he threw only 95 pitches to get through 8 innings. Now, the Blue Jays did square him up from time to time in this game. Not going to deny that. 11 hard hit balls in 8 innings. But Gibson was efficient. He mowed down the hitters. He still got the strikeouts. And if it was more of a blowout, if it wasn't a 2-run game and Felix Bautista wasn't perfectly well rested, there's a chance Gibson would have gotten a shot to go for the complete game at just 95 pitches through 8 innings. But of course, time of the game, you got the best closer in baseball, you're going to him. But hey, it wasn't, total domination from Gibson. I mean, 10 whiffs only on 43 swings, 4 of them on the sweeper. But otherwise, his stuff wasn't amazing. But I really thought his sinker really moved well in this game. It had a lot of dip on it. He got a lot of ground balls on that pitch. 8 balls in play against the sinker. Almost all of them were ground outs for Kyle Gibson. His pitches hadn't been moving his last couple of times out. I mean, it was back-to-back pretty rough starts for Gibson. And then he turns it around and pitches his best. And he's made 3 good starts now against the Blue Jays this season. I was just really impressed. It was his usual pitch mix. He throws 6 different pitches, none of them more than 24 times out of his 95 offerings. Just keeps guys off balance. That's what he did to the Blue Jays, right? Was down in the zone with the sinker, with the changeup. A lot of righties in that lineup, so he threw a lot of sweepers to the right-handers and got the swings and misses when he needed them. The changeup, didn't use it as much as he has recently, but I still thought it was good when he threw it. He dropped in the curveball in some big moments. And then just his final pitch of the day, that 95th pitch, was Just an awesome sinker, basically like a drop it into the zone sinker on a 3-2 pitch to Brandon Belt, where it started above the letters and then dropped right to the top of the zone for a called strike 3. That was the most excited, most fired up I have seen Kyle Gibson all year coming off the mound after that strikeout. It was cool to see. Just dominated the Blue Jay bats. And listen, I know it's been a little rough the last couple of starts, but he's been solid for the O's this year. And I still right now, maybe pick 4 starters for an American League Division Series. I'm giving Kyle Gibson the ball in one of those games. Second thing you need to know from this one is that, wow, Cedric Mullins absolutely had a day in this game for the Orioles. And really for Mullins, he's had now 2 games where he's kind of taken over since he returned from the second hamstring, quad, groin injury. Other than that, it's been kind of a struggle for him at the plate, but when he gets going, he really goes. Of course, the first game I'm talking about is the game in Seattle where he robbed the homer and then hit the homer. This one was kind of similar. Mullins goes 2 for 4 with a double, a homer, and 2 RBIs. His home run was the difference in this game. A 2-run shot off of Blue Jay starter Jose Barrios in the 5th inning gave the Orioles a 4-2 lead. Mullins in that 5th frame hit it 104 off the bat, driving it 396 feet to right center field for the homer. Also chopped a double down the first base line later in the game. Made a nice catch in the 4th inning on a sac fly that saved a couple of runs. That was a nice running play. And then made what ended up being a huge play in this game in the 7th inning when Danny Jansen, with 1 out, hit a ball to the warning track in left that Austin Hayes just did not track well, and it hits off the track, hits off the wall. And then Cedric Mullins tries to pick it up, bobbles it a bit, and Jansen rounds second and tries to go for third. Mullins with just a strike, 1-hop throw from all the way out in center field. Perfect tag by Ramon Arias, guns down Jansen, trying to get to third for the second out of the 7th. That was a huge swing in this game. Jays would have had runner on third, 1 out, down 2 in the 7th. Instead, nobody on, 2 down. That really helped out Kyle Gibson, who then struck out Kevin Biggio, the next batter, to end the inning. Just a huge play by Mullins. And that is the biggest knock on Cedric Mullins, is his throwing arm. It is at best major league average, but he can wind it up sometimes and let one loose. And that is exactly what happened in the 7th inning on Thursday night. Third thing you need to know from the Orioles' 5-3 win over the Blue Jays is that we might be seeing the front end of an Anthony Santander heater. This guy can get on a heater sometimes, and he can hit homer after homer. We've seen it start the last 2 days. Santander, who had been out since Friday with a back issue, returned to the Orioles lineup last night and casually hit 2 home runs in their victory. And what does he do in this one? Well, he hits another home run. This one was a 2-run shot off Barrios in the 4th inning that tied the game at 2 after Toronto had gotten 2 runs off Gibson in the top half of the inning. Santander hit his 24th homer of the season and his 3rd in the last 2 games. It was his 3rd in his previous 4 at-bats for Santander. A rocket out to Utah Street for Santander. It was his 9th Utah Street hit of his career and the 1st of the season. He hit it 109 off the bat, traveled 417 feet for the 2-run bomb. And surprising enough, this was brought up on the broadcast by Kevin Brown after the home run. Santander now has 9 Utah Street homers. The Orioles' all-time leader is Chris Davis with 11. It kind of breaks my brain that Santander only has 2 fewer Utah Street homers than Chris Davis does. He's quietly had a really, really great Orioles career since 2017, has Anthony Santander. And we know he's a free agent after 24. I'm hoping they re-up him a little bit, but I'm enjoying him being back in the middle of the Orioles order as a power bat. Fourth thing you need to know from the O's win on Thursday is that Ryan Mountcastle's on-base streak unfortunately ended. It was 28 games consecutively on base for Mountcastle, which was the longest active streak in the major leagues at the moment, but he just could not continue it on Thursday night. And that's surprising. A Blue Jays team that he has crushed all season and his entire career. He goes 0 for 4 with a strikeout against the Jays. Now, he did hit a missile to right center field in the 5th inning. Dalton Varsho made a nice play to track it down to end the frame. That looked like it would have been the one that extended the streak, but it ends for Mountcastle. However, a couple other hitters picked him up to stay hot. Adley Rutschman went 3 for 4 with 3 singles and a run scored. Adley hitting now .314 in the month of August. And Austin Hayes had a nice day, 1 for 3 with a single and was hit by a pitch. He's now been on base in his last 10 games. And after he was really struggling in July, specifically after the All-Star break, Hayes now has an .840 OPS in the month of August And luckily for the O's, Hayes is not doing what he did in 2022. And he was great in the first half and was abysmal in the second half. This year, great in the first half and still good in the second half. That has been huge for the O's order. And the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 5-3 win over the Jays that clinched the series on Thursday night is that Felix Bautista came in and shut the door. And it was really nice that Kyle Gibson could go 8 innings on Thursday night because the Orioles didn't have Jacob Webb. They didn't have Yenier Cano. Both had pitched each of the first 2 games of this series. And with this Blue Jay lineup being so righty heavy, it's not a great spot to use Cionel Perez or Danny Coulombe, who returned on Thursday, to get a full inning of outs. So the O's would have probably had to go back to Shintaro Fujinami in a 2-run game had Gibson not gotten through 8. But he did perfectly. He got himself right to Felix Bautista, and it helped that Gibson threw 13 pitches in his first 2 innings. According to Alex Fast on Twitter, that was the least amount of pitches it's ever taken Kyle Gibson, his 10-plus year MLB career, to get through 2 innings, and that helped him finish 8. You can go right to Felix, and Felix shuts the door. And oddly enough, once again, remember Felix threw the 9-pitch top of the 9th inning on Tuesday night to keep the game tied and did not record a strikeout? Once again, on Thursday, Felix did not record a strikeout. It was a pop out to first in foul territory, a fly out to left, and a fly out to center. That is now just 5 appearances on the season for Felix Bautista in which he didn't record a strikeout. And the first time all year, he's gone back-to-back appearances without a K. It's odd, but it's keeping the workload down. And honestly, as long as he's getting the outs, I don't mind right now if they're not strikeouts, because he threw 2 innings this week and only threw 19 total pitches. That is going to be huge as they watch his workload here down the stretch. And he helped the Orioles get in the save and getting the 5-3 win, getting the series victory over the Blue Jays. And the Orioles now, with the win, just continue to play amazing baseball. A season high 31 games over 500 at 79-48 on the year. But a couple other things happened, some news and notes on Thursday before that Orioles win over the Jays. And going to get to them, including some thoughts on Danny Coulombe, Jack Flaherty, and others. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. Now, the Orioles are no longer playing the Blue Jays, so maybe I'm not thinking Ryan Mountcastle is going to go deep in every at-bat, but listen, Anthony Santander swinging it well. You think he can hit a homer tonight again against the Rockies? Well, I sure do. And on Sleeper, you can swing for the fences with up to 100 times payouts. All you have to do is choose 2 or more players that you like and select more or less on their stat categories like homers, strikeouts, hits, and more. Get your picks right, and you could win big. And they've got dynamic payouts at Sleeper as well. There's more stat categories to place contests on, and you get higher payouts than other apps with less picks. It's really that simple. So use the promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. So the Orioles take down the Blue Jays 5-3 on Thursday night to clinch the series. And also wanted to get to a couple of Orioles news and notes from during the day on Thursday as well. Starting with Danny Coulombe, who rejoined the O's on Thursday. Baltimore activating him from the 15-day injured list and adding him back to this Orioles bullpen where, listen, this pen has pitched pretty well lately, but they could always use a Danny Coulombe. Coulombe, who spent 15 days on the IL with that left bicep tendonitis. It was nice to see that right when those 15 days were up after he pitched 1 rehab outing, a 1-2-3 inning with 2 Ks in AAA Norfolk, he was back for the O's. And I mean, Coulombe's been awesome this year. What an incredible pickup that was. Just basically a waiver claim trade from Minnesota 2 days before opening day. And he's been one of the Orioles' best relievers all year. 39 innings on the season. Coulombe has a 2.77 ERA and 48 strikeouts to just 9 walks on the year for the left-hander. He's just been under the radar awesome for Baltimore this year. Those breaking balls that he throws are devastating, get righties and lefties out. And, you know, with Coulombe coming back, it was Nick Vespi who was optioned down to AAA Norfolk. And listen, Nick Vespi has just kind of been the ultimate up-down guy for this Orioles bullpen the last 2 years. Not quite good enough to hold down a regular spot, but not bad enough where he's going to sit in AAA for long periods of time. It's a tough life. It's definitely better than being a guy who just sits in AAA. But, Brendan Hyde's talked about how Vespi has kind of owned the role and, is accepting that he can still help this team. Vespi, it was his fourth time he's been optioned this year. Remember, you can only be optioned 5 times in one season before, if you wanted to do it again, you would have to place a player through waivers. So the Orioles could call up Vespi and send him down once more without having to worry about it. Because it's already August 25th, I don't see them wanting to do it 2 more times this year, which means he's probably safe. But they got up around the 5 last year with Vespi too. I'll be interested to see if maybe next year is the year he can kind of finally stick in this bullpen. But 14 2/3 innings pitched for Vespi this year out of the pen, 16 hits, 7 runs, 9 Ks, 2 walks, and 2 homers. He's been solid once again. It's just the stuff has not really taken him to the next level, at least at the major league level to this point. But the good thing about this, we knew that Danny Coulombe was probably going to be back shortly, and I'd said it on the pod. I think most people knew that Nick Vespi was kind of the easy option here. He has options. He's also a left-hander, and Coulombe is objectively better than Nick Vespi. So that was kind of the easy move here. But with Danny Coulombe back, right, and I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week doing the bullpen trust power rankings, but with Coulombe back, we know Bautista's pitching great. Cano's been great lately. Perez has been great lately. Jacob Webb's been amazing. And, Shintaro Fujinami is up and down, but when he shows the good stuff, it's really, really good. I would argue right now, in the Orioles 7-man bullpen, the only guy I wouldn't feel at least solid about pitching in a high-leverage spot is Austin Voth. And that's because, he was bad earlier in the year, been out with an injury for a while, and just came back from the injury list on Wednesday, has not pitched in a game yet since he came off the IL. And he's kind of the long relief mop-up 7th guy in the bullpen at the moment. When you have 6 or 7 guys in the pen that I think most people would trust, at least at some points, in a high-leverage spot, you could argue the Orioles bullpen right now is in one of the best spots it's been all year. And that's before they potentially add John Means, DL Hall, and Tyler Wells to that bullpen. It's feeling kind of good right now for the Orioles pen, feeling much closer to what it felt like for long periods of time in 2022. Now, some other pitching news for the Orioles. Of course, the rotation's been kind of mixed up a little bit this week because Jack Flaherty was scratched from his Wednesday start. Talked about it being, he just didn't bounce back right from his last start in San Diego where he got lit up for 7 runs. Brandon Hyde called it general soreness. They didn't really get into much more than that, but Flaherty was scratched. They moved Dean Kramer up a day to Wednesday. He pitches 6 scoreless. Now, it was easier to move guys up when you have a 6-man rotation. Guys stay on regular rest. Flaherty wasn't ready to go Thursday, so Kyle Gibson gets moved up. He goes 8 innings, 3 runs. This seems to be working out for the O's. Hopefully it continues for Cole Irvin, because we did learn from Brandon Hyde before the game Thursday that Flaherty will not start tonight here on Friday. It will be Cole Irvin, who was originally slated to start the Saturday game against the Rockies. He will start tonight's Friday night game 1 against Colorado. Hopefully he keeps up that streak of moved up a day and pitching really well. But Brandon Hyde did say Jack Flaherty has been, quote, improving, and they're just kind of waiting to see how he feels here on Friday. The Orioles still have it listed TBA for Saturday and Sunday starters. We'll get to it in a minute when we preview the series, kind of who it could be depending on Flaherty's health. It is nice to have this happen while you're working with the 6-man bullpen. It makes it a whole lot easier, and Kramer and Gibson the last 2 nights have certainly shown that. But as I said on yesterday's episode, the Orioles would still really like Jack Flaherty back in this rotation. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that. But then the last Orioles news and note I wanted to get to isn't really an Orioles one anymore, but just wanted to shout out to Trey Mancini, who, got released by the Cubs about a month ago. It wasn't going well after he signed with Chicago this offseason, but he's finally been picked up once again. Mancini earlier this week signed a minor league deal with the Cincinnati Reds. They sent him to AAA Louisville, and he made his debut in the Reds system on Thursday night, and he was awesome. Mancini went 3 for 4 with 2 homers and 3 RBIs in his first AAA game with the Reds. Also, kind of another throwback to a former Oriole, his second home run for Mancini, which was a solo opposite field shot in the 8th inning that tied the game, came off Brendan Hanafy. You may remember Brendan Hanafy as a former Orioles pitching prospect who got Tommy John. They tried to bring him back, but eventually released him. He is now up in AAA and giving up homers to an old friend in Trey Mancini. Shout out to Trey. I mean, the Reds have a lot of position players who are good prospects who are filling up that roster. It's been tough for them to get some guys on that roster position player-wise, but they did just place Joey Votto on the 10-day injured list, so maybe that leaves a little opening at first base for Trey Mancini. The initial move was they recalled Nick Senzel, but Now they don't really have, the Reds, a true first baseman on the roster. They just have a bunch of guys who can play first base sometimes. So if Mancini hits and Votto's out for a little bit of time, maybe Trey can get back to the big leagues with a good and chasing for the playoffs Cincinnati team. Would certainly love to see that for an Oriole favorite in Trey Mancini. But back in Baltimore, the Orioles are staying at home this weekend after taking 2 of 3 from the Blue Jays to open up the homestand. They will welcome in a team that is not playing very good baseball. That is the Colorado Rockies. It's a 3-game series between the Rocks and the O's this weekend, and I'll preview it coming up next. So the Orioles are taking on the Rockies starting tonight, and kind of feels like last weekend again, right? Like the Orioles were going to Oakland to play a terrible A's team, the worst team in baseball, and they went in there and they swept them. Basically, that's what the Orioles should do against the Rockies this weekend. Now, the O's I mentioned are 79 and 48. The Colorado Rockies come in with the inverse record of the Orioles. They are 48 and 79 this season. It's been kind of a disaster year for the Rockies. Now, they are coming off just a miserable series. Now, it wasn't their worst played series of the year. Like, they were in all 3 games, but miserable for Orioles fans because they were in Tampa Bay this week for a 3-game series with the Rays. Now, coming into that series, the way the Rockies are playing, the way the Rays are playing, I didn't expect the Rockies to win any games. And wouldn't you know it, the Rays swept them. But when you take a look at how each game went, it does become frustrating and gives you a look at how bad this Rockies team is. Tuesday night, game 1. Rockies lead 4-3 going into the bottom of the 8th. They give up 9 runs in the 8th inning and lose game 1. Game 2, Rockies lead 5-3 into the bottom of the 9th. They give up 2 runs and should have given up the walk-off. The replay review crew in New York gave the Rockies a gift to get it to extra innings. They don't score in the 10th. Brandon Lau, he a Terp, walks it off in the bottom of the 10th. They lose game 2. Game 3 on Thursday, 3-3 game in the bottom of the 8th. 2 outs, 1 on. Josh Lowe launches a 2-run shot to give the Rays the lead, and the Rockies lose game 3, and it was a sweep. Again, didn't expect coming in the Rockies to help the O's at all, but when you have that many chances to win, at least win one of these games. But that bullpen is kind of a disaster. I mean, they were already bad. They traded away from it a little bit at the deadline. Daniel Bard, their closer, has been really bad. They've tried Justin Lawrence in that role, kind of a sidewinder. He blew the save on Wednesday night. They've got guys like Jake Bird in there, and Brent Suter blew 2 leads this week. It's just a disaster. Kind of the whole pitching staff is a disaster for the Rockies. That team this season, 2nd worst ERA in baseball at 5.57 for their team ERA. Only the A's are worse. And here's the stat that really blows my mind about the Rockies this year. They are dead last in Major League Baseball in strikeouts. Coming into play on Thursday, the Rockies had struck out just 874 batters on the season. Now, it's kind of hard to put that number into context, right? You're looking at about 126 games and 874 strikeouts. It's not a great number. Here's how you put it into context. The Washington Nationals are 29th in strikeouts by a pitching staff. They have struck out 966 batters this year. They have almost 100 more strikeouts than the Rockies do in last place. And the Nats and the Rockies are the only teams that haven't struck out at least 1,000 batters this year. The pitching staff is bad for Colorado, and they don't punch out anyone. Plus, you add in an offense that Charlie Blackmon's having a solid year, and Nolan Jones, the rookie's been pretty good. But otherwise, the offense has been a disaster. They are 29th in baseball in team, or excuse me, they are 30th. They are dead last now in baseball in team OPS plus at 84, which means their entire offense across the board, 16% worse than league average. They've been abysmal. Now, I talked about all this bad pitching. Well, who is that bad pitching that's going to face the Orioles this weekend? Let's start with tonight's game. Game 1, Friday night, 7:05 p.m. Eastern time start. The Orioles' wearable flag is the giveaway at Oriole Park tonight. And I mentioned Cole Irvin will be taking the mound for the Orioles in this one. Irvin with a 4.66 ERA in 58 innings this year. And he's been good since the O's moved him back to the rotation in those 2 starts since he got back in. 10 innings, 1 run, 9 strikeouts, 2 walks, and just 6 hits in that time. He's looking to continue that against a Rockies team who will also send a lefty to the hill. That is Kyle Freeland, the 30-year-old lefty who has a 5.02 ERA in 129 innings over 24 starts this season. Last time out, just kind of a typical what you've seen from Freeland this year. 5 innings, 8 hits, 4 runs, 6 Ks, and 1 walk against the White Sox for Freeland. He hasn't been good in August. 4 August starts for Kyle Freeland, has a 6.14 ERA in the month. Then we move to the Saturday game. Another 7:05 p.m. Eastern time start at the Yard is the Felix Bautista bobblehead giveaway on Saturday night. Now, the Orioles are currently TBD with the starter, but basically they have 2 options. One is Jack Flaherty is potentially ready to go. He gets pushed back and starts Saturday. Or Flaherty's not ready yet. You move up Kyle Bradish one day. He hasn't pitched since Sunday, so he'll be easily on regular rest, pitching Saturday in Game 2. And going against the O's will be Chris Flexen, the 29-year-old righty who began this year in the Seattle Mariners rotation, then the bullpen, then got traded away and DFA'd by the Mets because he was terrible this year. Overall, between Seattle and Colorado, Flexen has a 7.18 ERA in 67 2/3 innings. Rockies picked him up in late July and put him in the rotation. He hasn't been horrible since they did, and honestly, he's coming off his best start of the year when he went 6 innings, a 1-run ball, 5 Ks, no walks against the White Sox earlier this week. But Flexen just, it hasn't been a very good season. And then the Sunday game to finish it off is a 1:35 p.m. Eastern time start. Again, there's 3 options the Orioles could go with. If Jack Flaherty does end up throwing on Saturday, you would then most likely have Kyle Bradish make his scheduled Sunday start. If Jack Flaherty does not throw Saturday, then Bradish throws Saturday. Then you could either have Flaherty throw Sunday if he's ready, or if Flaherty's still not ready Sunday, you would move up Grayson Rodriguez and he would be the Sunday starter, still on plenty of rest. But the Rocky starter will be the left-hander Ty Blach. The former Orioles legend, the 32-year-old lefty, has a 4.39 ERA in 41 innings of work for the Rockies this season. His start against the Rays this week wasn't great. 4 innings, 7 hits, 3 runs, 3 walks, and 4 strikeouts. But Blach pitched with the Orioles back in 2019, made 5 starts with the O's, had an 11.32 ERA in 20 2/3 innings. Then he had the Tommy John surgery. The Orioles stuck around with him, kept him in the organization, and then he came back to rehab with the Orioles in 2021 with the low-A Delmarva Shorebirds. They tried to move him up. Eventually, they just released him in 21, caught on with other major league organizations, obviously. But, I had Sam Jelinek, the former play-by-play voice of the Delmarva Shorebirds, on this podcast a couple of years ago, and we were talking about guys and pitchers in Delmarva, and he talked about how important Ty Blach was when he was rehabbing that year to the very young, like sometimes 19, 20-year-old, sometimes, very close to coming out of the Dominican Republic, very young, had maybe just moved to the States. Talked about how important Blach was in bringing together and mentoring that young group of pitchers. He just could not stop telling me great things about Ty Blach and what he had done with those young pitchers. So shout out to Ty Blach, because he certainly helped, the maturation of some of these young guys on that 2021 Delmarva team, and salute to Ty Blach for that. And he'll make his return to Oriole Park, hopefully to a standing ovation on Sunday. But that's what that 3-game series looks like. And you can listen to every single pitch of the 3-game weekend series between the Orioles and the Rockies on the SXM app through SiriusXM. Just download the app and search Orioles to listen to that O's hometown radio broadcast this weekend. But again, it's Orioles and Rockies over the weekend. Listen, this Rockies team is bad. They didn't help the O's this week against the Rays. This should be a sweep, and at the very worst, another series win for the Orioles. But either way, I'll be back with you on Monday, recapping the entire weekend series between Baltimore and Colorado. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.